5. Something I've been having on my mind lately, and for various reasons and such. Not really anything necessarily that's going on with me, but just have had on my mind, and trust me, I've had this happen before. But the idea of people talking about you and saying things about you, and I've had that happen before. And I would dare say that many, if not most, maybe even all of us at one time or another had people that were saying things or spreading things about us, and they really weren't true. They were totally misunderstanding what we were trying to say or do or whatever, and maybe they were just blatant lies. I don't know. But certainly sometimes people can misunderstand or misconstrue our thoughts and our plans and assign us with motives that really aren't right. And so I put these couple verses, I put them out on Facebook, and some of you I know saw what I put out there, and it's Matthew 5, verses 11 and 12. And the comment I put with them is that you may find yourself in good company when people say things about you. Look at these verses, Matthew 5 and verse 11 and 12. And that's where we're going to launch off and what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at a few verses that relate to this because, like I said, if this hasn't happened to you before, chances are good at some point it will. And a lot of times the way that we can have a Christian response to what other people have to say about us can go a long way toward either escalating a problem or de-escalating a problem based on how we handle it. And really there is a Christ-like way to handle when people say or do things against us. Verse 11. This is the very end of the Beatitudes. And he says, verse 10, the last one of the Beatitudes, would also be connected with this. It says, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And immediately right after this, he says, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And so Jesus speaking, of course, he says when people revile you or persecute you or say evil things against you because of me, rejoice and be glad. Now, if they say unkind and vile things about you, and it's because you're doing vile and unkind things, well, that's different, isn't it? You're deserving what they're saying. But if you are being reviled or persecuted or people are saying those things against you while you are doing what is right and doing what is righteous, then certainly you are to be commended. But Jesus even says you are to rejoice, and because your reward is great in heaven. You know, they said a lot of things about Jesus, and they said things about his disciples. Jesus, in this context, it's early on in his ministry, when he has not quite yet met the resistance that he's going to meet, and his apostles haven't yet been persecuted. But give it time, it happens. And when you stop to recognize that the apostles, Jesus Christ, and the prophets all met persecution and resistance. So why would we think that we should expect anything different than that? In fact, we should expect the same in our world. Even though we are blessed to live in a country where we are allowed to worship the way that we want. We're allowed to do that. We can put our name on the outside of the building and put a sign down on the street and put it in the phone book and put a website out there. And for the most part, we really don't have to fear any kind of persecution or anything. Now, there'll be people that think about things about us or maybe even say them, but for the most part, we go relatively unscathed. Although there are many people all around our globe that don't have those kind of protections. You know, even our brother Joe T that we pray for a lot and think about often. Some of the areas that Joe T goes to, danger is a definite possibility. And so, you know, it's not quite so safe as being here because there are many people there that do oppose Christianity. And so, you know, we need to pray very hard for him and other brothers like him, brothers and sisters all around the globe that are in different situations. And so we've got to be very much aware of that. And so there are things that are done and said. Let's look, I want us to go over a few chapters to chapter 11. Go over to Matthew chapter 11. Turn over there. In Matthew 11, you will see the beginning of Matthew 11 is in which John is in prison. John the Baptist is in prison. And John is near his death. And he sends message to Jesus and wants to know if he's the one that's to come or they're to wait on somebody else. And of course, Jesus, responds to him and lets him know that yes, he's the one. Tells about the things that he's said and done. He gives his answer in verses 4, 5, and 6. And here's what the answer is. Jesus saying, go back and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. And then he goes on to talk about John. And he says about John in verses 7 and following, when you went out to see John, what did you go see? He said, did you go see a reed shaken by the wind? He said, no. Did you go to see a man dressed in fine clothing? No, you didn't go see that either. You didn't go see somebody that sat in king's houses. But what did you go see? He said, you went out to see a prophet. And even I'll tell you, he is more than a prophet. This is of whom is written, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you. Prophecy made from Malachi. And so, here's what Jesus says, verse 11. Truly I say to you, among those born of women, there has arisen no one greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and that violent will take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who is to come. He who has ears, let him hear. But to whom shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces, calling to their flutes, to their playmates. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. Okay? He's talking about John. He says, John's greater than anyone that's ever lived, but those that are in the kingdom are even going to be blessed beyond John. But Jesus is talking about the goodness and the attributes of John. But now these are the verses I really want us to key in on, verses 18 and following. For John came neither eating nor drinking. In other words, he wasn't a social person. He had to eat and drink. We know that he had to do that. He was a human being. But he did not interact with the people. He was out in the wilderness, out on his own. He wasn't rubbing elbows with other people. He was just out there, and they came out to hear him. But they said about him, he came neither eating nor drinking, and they said, he has a demon. The man who was born to lead Jesus into his ministry and to open up and to open the way for Christ, the people said he was demon-possessed. Now, how far off base was that? But yet that's what they said about him. Verse 19. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. In other words, he came and was a social person. You look through the Gospels, you'll find Jesus at wedding parties. He is in people's houses. He's at banquets. He is in among the people. He's rubbing elbows with the people. He comes eating and drinking. What do they say about him? Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. So you've got one man that is completely out in the wilderness all by his own. And they say he's got a demon. And he's the greatest born among women. And then you've got, on the other side, the sinless Son of God. And he's a drunk and a glutton. And he does it the opposite way. So you know what the consistent thing is in those two things? No matter who you are or how perfect you are, people will find something to criticize. And they will make stuff up when they can't find something. You know, for us, sometimes they don't have to make stuff up. You know, we will be imperfect. You can find fault with us. But with Jesus, as perfect and sinless as he was, they still made accusations against him. They also made accusations against Jesus of demon possession and other things. You know, if they couldn't find anything true to say against him, they made it up. And you find that with things in our society. There are some people that are good and right, and when that happens, and when they try to do the right thing, there will be people come along and they will say all kinds of things about them. And they will accuse them of all sorts of things, hoping that some of it sticks. You know, that's what they're doing with Jesus. They're throwing out all kinds of accusations with the hope that some of it sticks upon him. But of course, none of it really ever does. And so here they are saying those things. You know, how mean and hurtful it would be to say against somebody as pure and perfect as Christ was, to call him a glutton and a drunk. But yet that's what they did. That is as far off base as it possibly could be. But how does he act? What does he say? What does he do? In fact, what he says, he doesn't really attack it at all. Instead, what he says, wisdom will be proved right. The results, the truth, it'll speak for itself. Boy, that's a difficult thing to say, isn't it? That's a difficult thing to hang in and do, is to say, well, you know, the truth will come out, the results will come out the way that they do. And so that's what Jesus was saying. Okay, now let's go over to 1 Peter. Chapter 3, 1 Peter 3. First Peter 3, starting in verse 8. A couple things he says here. And of course, Peter is one of those individuals that would have heard Jesus on the different occasions. He would have been there and heard Jesus at the Sermon on the Mount. He would have been there and heard what Jesus said about John. And so he's experienced these things. And so this is a man that's been with Christ and an apostle and an elder in the church, as we find out later in this book, in chapter 5, that he's an elder himself. And so this is a man that has grown, and this is a man that has matured along the way. And here he says in verse 8, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. You know, you read that and you think, wow, that's the guy that pulled out a sword and cut Malchus's ear off the night they arrested Jesus. My, has he come a long way. You know, and you see that. And so what an amazing thing it is that Peter has matured and grown to the point that this is his writing later on in life. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless, for to this you are called, that you may obtain a blessing. For whoever desires to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now who is there to harm you if you're zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if it is God's will, than for doing evil. What a beautiful passage that is to emphasize to us that we should accept those things that come to us. If we suffer, then let those things be to God's glory and let those things come about. He says, if those things come about, we need to be prepared to give an answer. People may ask us, why can you keep your good attitude? Why do you have such a good attitude? Or how are you able to keep your cool when all those people are saying all these things about you? How are you able to stay right, stay true? Why are you not attacking back? And Peter says we need to be ready to give an answer. And I think that's there for that reason. Because when people say things, then we can say, well, we've got peace that passes understanding. We've got blessings that you don't know about. We've got understanding because we've got these passages like what we saw in Matthew 5, that, blessed are those that are persecuted for righteousness, for great is their reward in heaven. Rejoice and be glad. Why? Because they persecuted the prophets before you. You find yourself in very good company when people are persecuting you because of the cause of Christ. Because they did that for the prophets. They did that for the apostles. They did that for Jesus himself. And you find yourself in good company. And so we should recognize that we may suffer for doing good. And we should accept that and realize that. Let's go to chapter 4. As we look at one more passage. 1 Peter 4. He goes on to further things. And of course, Peter's book is a general epistle. It is written to the church at large, in particular, Jewish Christians that are spread throughout the Roman Empire. And generally, it's a more Jewish audience. Although Gentiles certainly get much from them. But just to know, it's written as a general letter to Christians at large. Christians that in the latter part of the first century, when they would be reading this and looking at this letter, a lot of them would be in places where they are going to be persecuted for the cause of Christ. He says to them in verse 12, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice, insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or a thief, or an evildoer, as a meddler. Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. For it is time for judgment to begin at the household of God. And if it begins with us, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if the righteous is scarcely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? Therefore, let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. It is so easy to get wrapped up in what others are doing to us that we forget what we should be doing. That we forget about how we should act. We forget about what we should do, how we should live, and what we should do. And we get caught up in the moment. And we don't realize what we've been told. We don't realize that all these passages that we've looked at that have told us about how the righteous will suffer, about how they will suffer because of the Christ, and that we'll end up enduring these things. And so, these things all come about, and people are going to say things about us. And when they do, we need to recognize that what we need to do is have a Christ-like attitude about going about it. One more parting thought. Passage you may remember. It's one we're going to look at in our class on Sunday mornings. It's the end of Romans chapter 12. But it's the passage that says that when our enemy does things for us, that we're to do good things for them. He says, in so doing, it's like heaping burning coals upon their head. And so that we're to do that. In other words, their conscience is going to bother them because they're doing evil things to us and we're doing good things for them. And then the final verse of that chapter, Romans chapter 12, says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. If we have marching orders, if we have a call to action, if we have a battle to fight, if there is a call to battle for us, it is that right there. And that is to overcome evil with good. It feels a lot of times like we're being overcome by evil. But our job, our fight, is to overcome evil with good. And if we would focus on that, we will be so much happier, we will be blessed so much more, and we would have such a greater impact on those around us. And so here's what I want to say to you, is I want you to take that verse, and I want you to take these other things we've looked at, these things about persecution, these things about what people will say about us, and you find yourself in a situation. You find yourself in a difficult situation, maybe tomorrow afternoon or later on in the week or maybe a few weeks from now, and you find yourself, and I want you to think about those verses. Blessed are those that are persecuted. Blessed are those when people say things about you. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Realize that these fiery trials will come. Realize these things will come about so that we can be connected with Christ in His suffering. If we get connected with Christ in His suffering, we get connected with Christ in His glory. And if we think about those things, then maybe, just maybe, we might do a little better in withstanding the things that we go through. Because so many times, somebody will do something. They will say something unkind, or they will be unkind toward us, or they will do whatever out here in the world. And our reaction is to pounce, to jump back, to react. Instead, if we reacted in such a way that was more in line with what we've looked at tonight, I think we'll do a lot better in our Christian lives. And maybe, just maybe, someone will ask us what we looked at there in 1 Peter 3, and they'll say, why is it you have that hope? Why do you have such a different attitude? Why do you have that hope? And then we can give them an answer. It's because of my Lord and Savior. Because of everything He endured, then I figure I can endure or go through what little bit I've got going on. And you don't know, we don't know what kind of impact that might have on other people. And so be aware of that and do that. A couple things to mention. I've been wanting to mention to you lately and remind you, if you are wanting to overcome evil with good, we have a lot of tools at our disposal to do that with. To remind you, we have several muscle and a shovel books back there in the office, in my office. We put them in there so they don't all walk off at once, but they're in there not so that they will, will be hidden and we don't use them. We have them there so that we don't lose them all fastly, but we do want to give them out. Okay, we do want them to go out, but I have several of them in there. If you want any of those to give to somebody, by all means, let me know. We'll bring them out when we can give out to how many ever you need. We have several of the Searching for Truth DVDs. We have some other DVDs back there. We have some of the Returning to Truth books. We've got several of those. Also, there's some of those cards that we've had, the business card things to give out, that when we do something good to people, kind of like what we're talking about tonight, there's several of those different things that we have, different tools, different opportunities, and if we need to use those and be a blessing to other people by those. And we also have several tracts back there. We've got a pile of tracts. We've got probably 50 different subjects for tracts. So if you have somebody to ask you a Bible question and they're wondering, at work you're talking about why, why you do or don't do those kind of things at church, or whether it's right to do this or that, chances are good I've got a track on it in my office. We'll just look through it and see it. And so please, we've got to use those resources. Those things aren't going to save anybody sitting in my office. So let's get them out and distribute them, and let's try to overcome evil with good. And so let me know if there's anything you want to look at as far as all that goes. So let's all do a better job this week and all strive to be better Christians. And when people say things about us, realize we are in good company, because they said things about the prophets. They did things to the prophets. They did things to Jesus, and they did things to the apostles. And we shouldn't expect any different. If you have need tonight to come and give your life to Christ, or to come back to Christ, we want to give you this opportunity. Will you please come while we stand and sing?
Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with him within the narrow road? Would you have him bear your burden, carry all your load? Let him have his way with thee. His power can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul, and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee. Would you have him make you free and follow at his call? Would you know the peace that comes by giving all? Would you have him save you so that you need never fall? Let him have his way with thee. His power can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul, and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee. Would you in his kingdom find a place of constant rest? Would you prove him true each providential test? Would you in his service labor always at your best? Let him have his way with thee. His power can make you what you ought to be. His blood can cleanse your heart and make you free. His love can fill your soul, and you will see 'twas best for him to have his way with thee.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. If you're a visitor, please stick around after services so we can get to know you a little better. Tuesday morning Bible class will be at May 14th.
continue to partake of the Lord's Supper, if you go to room 6 to your right, as we sing the first and fourth verse of 392, let the beauty of Jesus be seen. Somebody will take care of your needs there. Following this song, Brother J.D. Anderson will close our service in prayer. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me, all his wonderful passion and purity. May his Spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. From the dawn of the morning to close of day, in example, in deeds, and in all you say, lay your gifts at his feet, ever strive to keep sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson of that word. The Lord keep us safe and turn us back. Let's get there and see them lost souls. The Lord be with those lost loved ones, those who are sick and afflicted, and those that are shut in. The Lord and everything that we say and do, Heavenly Father, in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You're welcome, Randy. I think it's about the fourth time I had that.
We never know if you're going to show up.
Well,
And what time?
right. I'll try to be there. It's just